ProPublica Illinois has done an explosive investigative report uncovering affluent neighborhoods in Illinois and the number of families in those neighborhoods who are doing this tuition scam in order to get financial aid for their kids who otherwise would not qualify for financial aid. So let me give you the details on what they're doing. Parents are giving up legal guardianship of their children during their junior or senior year in high school to someone else, a friend, aunt, cousin, or grandparent. The guardianship status then allows the students to declare themselves financially independent of their families so they can qualify for federal, state, and university aid. So these are not necessarily families living in poverty. However, I do have an issue with the blanket way in which this report covers these families. So I'll give you the example. Wealthy families are manipulating the financial aid process, according to Andy Forst, who's an admissions director at the University of Illinois. He also says they're manipulating the financial aid process to be eligible for financial aid they would not be otherwise eligible for. They are taking away opportunities from families that really need it. So I would agree with him, except there is a huge flaw in how financial aid is determined. The big determination is what your parents' income is. And so there's this assumption that if your parents are making good money, then they're gonna pay for your schooling. But we also know that that's not necessarily true. There are many parents who decide, no, you're gonna have to deal with this on your own. You're gonna need to take out your loans. You're gonna need to go into debt. I'm not gonna help you pay for college. I've seen those stories. Let me give you more examples. So while ProPublica Illinois uncovered this practice in North Suburban Lake County, where almost 4 dozen such guardianships were filed in the past 18 months, similar petitions have been filed in at least 5 other counties, and the practice may be happening throughout the country. The parents involved in these cases include lawyers, a doctor, and an assistant schools superintendent, as well as insurance and real estate agents. All right, so let's stop right there. Again, we don't know if the parents are actually going to help these kids pay for school. So that's point number 1. But point number 2 is the assumption that if someone is a real estate agent, they're like rolling in the big bucks and they can afford education for their kids. So I think the heart of the issue is that higher education is unaffordable, period. Like driving people to do these scams, and more importantly, putting so many students in debt. Like when we're talking about the federal assistance that these students get, we're talking about $5,000 a year. $5,000 a year is not gonna help cover the costs of higher education. I don't agree with people who are wealthy, doing this so they don't have to pay or so they can qualify. And I think there are people who need the money even more. But at the same time, I think that we're focusing on the symptoms of the issue rather than focusing on the issue.
Well, I mean, you really point up a couple of very complicated things when you talk about families that might be from means, but they don't offer those means to their child to go to college. I frankly hadn't considered that as a big part. This looks like an out-and-out fraud and scam to me, especially when it looks as though most of these juniors and seniors, when they reach that level, that's when they get the guardianship. That's when they get this independence. And as a result, just their earning power, if you want to think of it, is evaluated in what will then be how much tuition is meted out to them. I hadn't considered the fact that, of course, there are those families that don't pay for college. I think if you carve that out, this does look like a pretty big scam to me. On the other hand, of course, there's no arguing with what Anna just said, which is that the price of higher education is ridiculous. And by the way, it doesn't follow any kind of increase in the cost of living in America. In other words, the price of academics, higher education, has way outpaced any kinds of cost of living increases that might be associated with the increase of cost for everything else. So yeah, that's another scam. The cost of education, of higher education. And last point, JR, the idea that you would make higher education so expensive plays into a meta picture, which is that the 1% or whatever slice, what small percentage can actually afford that education, they're the only ones who are gonna get it. And as a result, most won't have access to that education, which is so critical.
And I also just want to quickly mention, like the reason why I focused on the real estate agent that was highlighted in the story is because that is a commission-based job. So there will be years where that individual is making great money, and then there will be years when that person is making no money, right? I mean, it really depends on the market. It depends on that person's specific location. And I know there were peers in my graduating class whose parents had those type of commission-based jobs, and it was really unfortunate because they actually on any given year would qualify for financial aid, but during their senior year, their parents made decent money. And so because their income in that particular year looked high, it looked like they could pay for their college education. But the fact of the matter was very different. I just think the way this system is set up creates a situation in which people are attacking one another, right? Like we're focusing on attacking one another. Oh, do you deserve that aid? And by the way, the system is so underfunded, right? So Pell Grant system is underfunded. So there's limited resources, and I agree that those limited resources should go to the people who need them the most. But it's creating a situation in which we're attacking one another instead of like really pointing fingers to the lawmakers who are refusing to do anything to alleviate the pain people are feeling due to the cost of higher education.
Okay.
Yeah.
We all can agree with the start of this whole thing is that college is overpriced. It costs too much for everyone to go to college in the first place. A lot of times the solution that some politicians, some presidential candidates are offering is that we have tuition-free college, or in other aspects, completely free college, even outside of just tuition, because we know there's other costs outside of just tuition. When they say tuition, we're like, oh yeah, that's a few $1,000s or several $1,000s per semester, but then there's a lot more to it.
Yes.
So first, everyone I think can agree on that. The problem is then how do we get around it? Because then when they do offer things like tuition-free college and people get upset about it or maybe don't glom onto it, it's because we have different levels of what you do to confront it. Number one, you got rich enough people that'll just pay. And be like, what's y'all's problem? It's $30,000 a year, get off my back. They don't understand how everything else works. The second group of people who just, who can avoid it, like what many of these people that are considered wealthy are doing, is they're avoiding it by skirting the system, scamming it. One of the aspects of it, they go and talk to a consultant that helps people lower their tuition and college costs by doing things like this. So they have enough money to pay them to do it. So there's a different level of helping them avoid it. They don't have enough to pay, but they have enough to pay that consulting group. There's the third group that just does it and goes into debt. That's probably the largest majority of people.
Yes, yep.
And there's the fourth group which just doesn't go to college and doesn't get advanced in life, and this opportunity of America doesn't happen for them. So we got all these breakdowns, and at the end of it, there's enough people doing it so many different ways that what doesn't change is the problem of overpriced colleges. So the problem doesn't get addressed because there's 4 different ways people go towards it, and nobody really cares because they're all doing it their own way.
We need solidarity, and we need to fight for a more equitable system, for a system that makes sense. So anyone, by the way, I think that education is important for enlightenment reasons, right? So maybe you want to go back to school just because you're curious about something. You just want to be educated on something. Like there used to be a time in America where there were affordable options, you could do that. But just to give you specific numbers, I looked into the University of Illinois system for in-state students, since the story is about affluent neighborhoods in Illinois. And the University of Illinois in-state costs, this includes tuition, it includes fees, books, supplies, housing. It's gonna cost you somewhere between $31,390 to $36,394 per year. Yep. So if you're a real estate agent, or even if you're a doctor, right? It really depends on what kind of doctor you are. And you might be making decent money, but you ain't making enough money to afford that. Right. And this is for in-state students.
Yeah, that's insane.
Out of control.
Then those are after-tax dollars. I mean, that's a real hit. That's absolutely right. And as JR says, most people end up in debt. I mean, just in general, most people.
And at the end of it, the people who can do things like this don't care for the people that are lower than them. If people are lower than you, you don't think about it. You go, well, yeah, I'm a real estate agent. Sure, I'm a doctor. I can at least pay a consulting firm to lower my potential costs. It sucks.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.